Okay, let's jump straight into it. Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to take the stack of source material you've given us and, well, cut right to the chase, pulling out the most important knowledge and insights for you.
That's good.
So today, we're tackling something pretty fundamental. How do we really learn languages? I mean, not just your first one, but a second, a third, maybe even a fourth.
Yeah, it's a process that's way more complex and, frankly, more fascinating than just, memorizing vocabulary lists.
Definitely.
And we've got this comprehensive document right here, specifically looking at how students acquire language. And interestingly, it pushes back on a common assumption almost immediately.
Oh, what's the first big takeaway then?
That we're often not just talking about a simple L1 versus L2 scenario,
Yeah.
First language, second language.
Right.
The source points out straight away that for many students, English might be their third or fourth or even fifth language they're learning.
Wow.
And that single fact, it just changes the whole landscape, doesn't it? It's not just about adding one new language. It's about navigating this already rich existing linguistic system while trying to build another one on top.
That immediately broadens the picture, yeah. So our mission today is to go through this material, uncover those crucial bits of understanding, maybe challenge some common myths along the way, and really give you a shortcut to grasping the core mechanics of how language acquisition actually works. Hopefully, get ready for some genuine aha moments.
Let's do it.
All right, let's unpack this. The document structures a lot of its thinking around something it calls Competency 002,
Right.
which is basically a framework for understanding this whole process. It looks at variation in language, the components, the stages of learning, what influences it, and importantly, how existing language knowledge plays a role.
And a core insight it kicks off with is just recognizing the sheer variability within language itself.
It's systematic,
Yeah.
yeah, but it shifts constantly.
How so? Well, think about how you text a friend versus how you write a formal email, or the jargon you might use talking about a hobby compared to, say, discussing politics.
Okay, yeah. Different registers.
Exactly. The source stresses that understanding these variations, dialects, registers, formality levels, maybe even by comparing them directly across the languages a person knows, is fundamental. Language isn't static. It's dynamic. It's context dependent.
So it's not just the words themselves, but how and why you're using them in a particular situation.
Precisely.
The source actually gives us some examples of the really basic building blocks, concepts that are often explicitly taught early on, like opposites happy, sad, positions on, under.
The concrete stuff.
Yeah, descriptors like tall, tiny, colors, shapes. It even lists these out in a table 2.1. These seem like concrete entry points for learners.
Right. And then it moves beyond those single concepts to the very purpose of language. Why do we even use it?
Good question.
The source outlines several key functions. Table 2.2 does this. Things like using language to get your needs met, that's the instrumental function.
Like asking for something.
Yeah. Or expressing yourself, your feelings, that's personal. Asking questions, discovering things, heuristic. Or even just for creative expression, like making believe or telling stories, that's the imaginative function.
Yeah.
It reminds us that language learning isn't just this academic exercise. It's functional, it's social, right at its core.
Okay, so we understand it varies, it serves all these purposes. What about the actual pieces and parts it's made of? The document gets into the major language components too.
Yeah, this is where we get into the nuts and bolts, you could say.
Okay.
Things like phonetics and phonology,
Yeah.
that's the sound system. Morphology, how words are built from smaller meaningful units like prefixes or suffixes.
Oh, like unhappy.
Exactly. Then syntax, sentence structure, grammar,
Yeah.
semantics, the meaning of words and sentences,
Yeah.
and pragmatics, which is all about using language appropriately in different social situations, knowing what to say, how to say it, when to say it.
That's a lot to juggle.
It is. Learners are navigating all these levels pretty much simultaneously.
And here's where the source makes a really powerful point, drawing on research, that a student's knowledge from their first language, their L1, it isn't a barrier, it's actually a resource.
That's key.
It can significantly help with learning a second language, but maybe you need to explicitly show them how, right? It's not automatic.
Exactly. Research does suggest that skills can transfer. The source emphasizes linking concepts across languages, so connecting the sounds and symbols, the graphophonics, the meaning, semantics, and the structure, the syntax. It's really about helping the learner see the connections between what they already know really well in one language and what they're encountering in the new one.
Okay.
And this is crucial for things like, reading comprehension, figuring out new words.
It gives such a clear, relatable example of this, too. Why a Spanish speaker might initially say estre instead of street.
Ah, yes. That example is perfect, isn't it? Because Spanish words typically don't start with that subconsonant cluster like street or stop. So a learner very logically applies the sound rules they know from Spanish. And they might insert a little vowel sound, like an E, at the beginning estre, to make it fit the pattern they're familiar with.
Ah, okay.
Understanding why they do that L1 influence is so much more helpful than just repeatedly correcting the pronunciation. It's about seeing the linguistic transfer that's happening under the surface.
That's a great illustration of the L1 actively influencing the L2 learning process. So, okay, how do we actually learn all these concepts and components? The source touches on different theories of language acquisition, right?
It does. It gives us a quick overview of some foundational ideas, like the innate theory, the idea that we're born with some kind of language capacity, a language acquisition device, as Chomsky called it. And there's behaviorism, the idea that language is learned mainly through imitation and positive or negative reinforcement, like stimulus response.
Okay.
And interactionism, which emphasizes that social interaction is absolutely crucial for language development. We learn language by using it with others.
And then it really zooms in on Stephen Kreishen's work. His stuff has been hugely influential in second language acquisition, hasn't it?
Massively influential. His 5 hypotheses offer a specific lens for looking at second language learning, which can be different from first language acquisition.
What are the key ideas there?
Well, first, he makes this big distinction between acquisition and learning.
Okay.
Acquisition is that subconscious process, like how a child picks up their first language just by being exposed to it and using it naturally. Learning, on the other hand, is conscious. It's studying grammar rules, memorizing vocabulary lists, like in a traditional classroom.
Ah, I see the difference.
He also proposed that we acquire parts of grammar in a somewhat predictable natural order, regardless of explicit teaching, and that the learned rules can act as a sort of monitor or editor, checking and correcting the language we produce through acquisition, but only under certain conditions.
Like when you have time to think about the rules.
Exactly. And then, critically, there's the input hypothesis.
Right, the comprehensible input idea. That you need language input that's just slightly beyond your current level.
I+1 is how he termed it.
Right, I+1. But it has to be understandable because of the context, or visuals, or explanation.
Precisely. Challenging but accessible. And tied very tightly to that is probably his most widely discussed hypothesis. The affective filter.
The affective filter. Okay, this comes up all the time in language learning discussions. How does the source describe it, and why is it considered so important?
The source describes it as this psychological barrier, almost like an emotional gatekeeper.
Okay.
When a learner feels stressed, anxious, embarrassed, maybe lacks confidence or motivation, this filter goes up. It gets higher.
And what happens then?
And when that filter's high, the comprehensible input, all that potentially useful language they're hearing or reading it, just can't get through effectively to the parts of the brain responsible for language acquisition. It literally blocks learning.
Wow. So feeling safe, comfortable, supported, that isn't just a nice to have in a learning environment. It's actually necessary for the brain to even acquire the language.
Fundamentally necessary, exactly. The source strongly emphasizes creating an environment where this filter stays low.
How do you do that?
Well, it suggests concrete strategies, allowing students to practice in lower pressure situations, maybe in pairs or small groups, before speaking to the whole class. Providing scaffolds like sentence frames or visual aids so they're not starting from scratch.
Makes sense.
Letting them prepare or preview material sometimes before they're asked to, perform with it. Offering choices in how they demonstrate what they know. It's really all about reducing that fear of making mistakes, that anxiety that can just slam that filter shut.
That really reframes how you need to think about a classroom, or really any learning environment, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
What other factors does the source highlight as having a big impact on language acquisition?
It points to the really profound influence of a student's past educational experiences, and also their family's view of schooling.
How so?
Well, different countries, different cultures have vastly different norms for classrooms and expectations around learning. Maybe collaborative group work is totally unfamiliar. Classroom routines might be different. Even understanding things we take for granted, like grading systems or attendance laws, can be completely new. The source has a figure 2.1, that sort of illustrates how these differing experiences can create challenges.
And the source even mentions something quite sensitive, that if a family had negative experiences with the school system in the past, maybe in their home country or even here, that could unfortunately make them hesitant to engage with the school now.
That's a really crucial and often overlooked point it brings up. Building trust, being transparent, explicitly explaining how the system works, that becomes absolutely vital.
Beyond the school system itself, what else?
Background knowledge. What you already know about the world is huge. The source references this really powerful study about understanding a description of a wedding. People's comprehension was massively higher if the description matched the wedding traditions they were already familiar with from their own culture.
Ah, right. I remember reading about that. So even if you know all the vocabulary words in the description, if you don't have the underlying cultural script or background knowledge about what typically happens at that kind of wedding, you still won't fully grasp the meaning. You'll miss the nuances, the significance.
Absolutely. Understanding isn't purely linguistic. It's deeply tied to your existing knowledge schemas. So the source suggests actively building this background knowledge. By consciously connecting new concepts to students' personal lives, their cultures, encouraging them to share their own experiences, maybe researching their heritage together. It's about validating and activating the knowledge they already possess, which makes the new information stick much better.
So instead of assuming a blank slate, you're explicitly building on their existing foundation, bringing their world into the learning space.
Precisely that. The source also touches briefly on literacy practices outside of school. It notes, citing some research, that some bilingual students, specifically mentioning Hispanic students in this context, may statistically have less exposure to reading at home compared to some monolingual peers. Now, this isn't framed as a deficit, but potentially linked to strong cultural traditions of oral storytelling. Or sometimes just practical issues like access to books in the home language or English.
So another external factor to be aware of?
Yes, and the source suggests teachers might try to find out about students' home literacy practices and perhaps connect families with community resources like libraries.
Okay, let's tackle a really common belief that younger kids are just inherently better, like way better at learning languages than older kids or adults. Is that actually true according to this material?
Well, this is another area where the source offers a more nuanced view. It definitely pushes back on the idea that age is the single most important factor for achieving overall high-level proficiency.
Oh, interesting.
While it acknowledges that young children might, on average, acquire a more native-like pronunciation more easily.
Okay, the accent part.
Yeah, the accent part. But older learners, adolescents, adults, they can absolutely reach very high levels of overall language proficiency. In fact, some research cited suggests something really interesting.
What's that?
That building strong cognitive and academic skills in the first language, particularly during the school years, say between ages 9 and 25, that strong L1 foundation is actually a powerful predictor and facilitator of success in learning a second language later on.
Wait, hang on. So being really good at reading, writing, thinking critically in your first language actually helps you learn a second one, even when you're older.
Exactly. It's not like some critical age window slams shut for all aspects of language learning.
Yeah.
It seems to be much more about having developed sophisticated thinking skills, learning strategies, and academic concepts in your L1 that you can then leverage and transfer to the task of learning L2.
So it's less about just the age number.
And more about the complex interaction of cognitive development, prior academic learning, and various social, emotional, and cultural factors. Age is just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. The source also briefly mentions the difference between simultaneous bilinguals, kids exposed to multiple languages from infancy, and sequential bilinguals who learn L2 after L1 is established, usually after age 3 or so. They go through slightly different developmental processes.
That really challenges the simple younger is always better narrative we hear so often.
It does.
And motivation, that comes up as a huge factor too, right?
Oh, absolutely. The source explicitly calls motivation one of the most important factors in second language acquisition. It even breaks down different types of motivation.
Like what?
There's integrative motivation that's wanting to learn the language, to feel part of the community or connect with the culture that speaks it.
Okay.
There's instrumental motivation, learning the language for a practical goal, like getting a job, passing a test, fulfilling a requirement.
Right, a means to an end.
Yeah. Then there's intrinsic motivation learning, because you find the process itself enjoyable and satisfying. And extrinsic motivation being driven by external rewards like praise, grades, or avoiding punishment.
So finding ways to tap into and boost a learner's motivation, whatever type it is, seems paramount.
Crucial. And the source suggests practical things teachers or supporters can do. Some are small gestures, some bigger.
Such as?
Maybe a teacher learning just a few key phrases in the student's native language that shows respect and investment, right? Celebrating small successes publicly to build confidence. Making sure learning tasks are challenging but achievable. It goes back to Krashen's comprehensible input, keeping the learner engaged but not overwhelmed.
Scaffolding tasks.
Exactly, providing support. Or using real-world objects, realia, to make connections more concrete and interesting. It's all about creating an environment where motivation can actually thrive, where the learner feels seen, supported, and capable of making progress.
This whole thread about the first language being a resource, not a problem to be overcome, is really powerful. And the source uses a fantastic analogy to capture this, doesn't it? One that seems to fundamentally shift how we should think about bilingualism. The iceberg analogy.
Ah, yes. The iceberg. It's a classic for a reason. The source presents this idea, which is really rooted in the work of Jim Cummins, and it completely refutes older, less accurate models that pictured languages as being stored in totally separate, isolated compartments in the brain.
Like they didn't interact at all.
Right, like the outdated model shown in Figure 2.3 in the source. Instead, the iceberg model proposes there's this deep, shared foundation of cognitive abilities and academic knowledge concepts, skills that's common across all the languages a person knows.
Okay.
This shared foundation is the large hidden base of the iceberg submerged underwater. Cummins called it the Common Underlying Proficiency, or CUP.
Oh.
The different languages the person speaks, maybe English, Spanish, Mandarin, whatever, they're just the visible tips of the iceberg sticking out above the water. They look separate on the surface, but they're drawing from the same deep, unified base.
So all the thinking skills, the problem-solving abilities, the understanding of concepts like math or science or history, they're all part of that deep, shared base. They're not language-specific.
Precisely. That's the core idea. The source makes this incredibly clear with a very direct statement. If a student can math in their native tongue, then they can math in English.
Wow.
The underlying concept of math, the ability to reason mathematically that resides in the CUP, that common base. The student just needs the English language tools, the vocabulary, the grammar, to express that knowledge they already possess.
So supporting their native language
Actually strengthens this common underlying proficiency, which in turn benefits their acquisition of the second language and any other languages they might learn. It's not a zero-sum game where learning one language takes away from another. It's additive. They build on each other.
That just changes everything, doesn't it? It means a student's first language isn't something to be ignored or, worse, suppressed. It's the very bedrock upon which they're building their second language.
It's a truly fundamental shift in perspective.
Yeah.
It means recognizing the incredible cognitive resource that a bilingual or multilingual learner brings with them.
Wow. Okay, that was a genuinely deep dive. We've covered so much ground from the basic building blocks of language and, why we even use it, through the major theories of how we learn, all those surprising factors that influence the journey from anxiety and the affective filter to background knowledge and motivation.
Right.
And we landed on that incredibly powerful idea of the common underlying proficiency, that shared mental foundation beneath the surface of different languages.
Yeah, and understanding these different pieces, especially grasping the value of the first language, is a crucial resource. The absolute necessity of creating a supportive, low-anxiety learning environment and recognizing how much background knowledge and motivation really matter. It gives us a far richer and hopefully more effective framework for thinking about language learning than just, drilling grammar rules.
It really makes you appreciate the incredible complexity and resilience of the human brain.
Yeah.
And the wealth of knowledge and skills that language learners bring with them, not despite their first language, but often because of it.
Indeed. And seeing languages not as these separate silos in the brain, but as different visible expressions of a shared, deeper cognitive capacity, like the iceberg analogy illustrates so well, that's a truly transformative insight, I think.
So what does all this mean for you listening, whether you're navigating the challenges of learning a language yourself, or maybe you're supporting someone else on that journey, a student, a friend, a colleague, or perhaps you're just perpetually curious about how our amazing brains work?
Well, this whole discussion raises a really important question, doesn't it? If we accept that our thinking skills, our concepts, our knowledge base, form this interconnected, common underlying proficiency, accessible through any language we know,
Yeah.
how could explicitly recognizing and truly leveraging this shared foundation fundamentally change how we approach teaching, how we communicate, or just how we interact with people from diverse linguistic backgrounds in our schools, our workplaces, our everyday lives.
That is definitely something to think about. Until our next deep dive,